right. Yeah, it's all right. So yeah, it's 8:02. I'm not sure if folks are back. We've got Jesse, Michael's back. Yeah. If possible, if you can go, if people can go camera on, that would be great. Just while we discuss here, I might still have a couple that are on their way back. All right, got Teddy back. There we go. All right, so I think that's pretty much everyone back. So yeah, basically then all I wanted to do was just gather some initial thoughts having looked at this. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at a technology integration plan before, so this was mainly about just getting a chance to see what an example of one looks like, and then maybe to do a quick analysis of it based on those sort of four areas of the analysis and the technology and the training and the timeline. Um, so I'll just kind of open up the floor. We don't need to go through this, one area at a time. If you have an observation in any of these four areas, it could be something you noticed that looked like they did it particularly well, or there was clearly an example of of something in it, or if having gone through it there's things that you notice that maybe you would suggest as improvements, or places where the plan didn't seem to be as effective as it could. So I'll just kind of jot down things as people share their thoughts. We're a small enough group, I think pretty much anyone could just chime in if you've got something you'd like to contribute.
In terms of like training, I saw there was a whole goal just devoted to how the teachers would get training in like the new technology that was going to be implemented. And then it like also listed like who would be responsible for that training, when it would be going. So I thought they like did a good job going into detail about what exactly the teachers would be getting out of this experience.
Yeah, and they also it's clear that they have a sort of a model where they have sort of a technology leadership team that's designed to be going into the classrooms and working with the teachers to help them integrate various technologies into the classroom. So, yeah, they definitely, knew that with whatever their plan included, that it would have to involve a pretty significant portion related to that training piece. What else did we see or notice?
I noticed something interesting with the timeline. For most of the goals, it wasn't really described. It just said ongoing. Besides for I think it was goal 4, it kind of said annually for some, but most of it wasn't really specified for a specific amount of time.
Yeah, and actually, I had that exact same note looking at this plan. And to be fair, this document is clearly a big picture document that's supposed to overview a pretty significant um, range of things. But if we're looking at this from a goal standpoint, from a management standpoint, if we go back to what we talked about with goals and SMART goals, one of the most powerful elements of a SMART goal is that T, which is the time bound. If you have a bunch of things that are just ongoing, you kind of lose a little bit of the urgency of trying to meet a deadline. So I absolutely agree. I would have loved to have seen, at least on some of those items, a little clearer idea of how much time they think this thing is going to take. I mean, I obviously there are things which are just going to be continuous, but that does seem to be a bit of a cop out in a way, uh, in terms of some timeline planning of just sort of letting themselves say, well, we never really said when this was going to be done. We just said that we were going to get there. So yes, I did. I noticed that exact same thing. All right, good. What else? Anything from the analysis end of things, the needs, the audience, goal setting?
I think the audience was kind of like you said, like before we started, kind of for anybody who wanted to, just like I don't want to say like a regular person, but like a regular person. It kind of gave in the beginning a description of like Newington itself and what the district contains, and I thought the language was simple enough for anybody who like wants to read it. You don't have to have a background in technology to understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of it was in sort of plain language. If we're looking at it from that sort of instructional design light standpoint, the first thing they did was about the district. So they're providing some information that they understand the community that they're developing this plan for. They put in their vision, like the school district's vision of their learner, which is important because that's what drives, obviously, or should drive all of their technology decisions. Is they should connect to that vision of the learner. They also then talked specifically about the vision for technology, like the technology committee itself had a vision statement. So yeah, they clearly sort of looked at their community, looked at who this was being written for, came up with these vision statements, these sort of overarching goal ideas. Another thing that I liked, and this is maybe just semantics, but for sort of each of their main areas, um, they listed strengths. And then did anybody catch, rather than saying weaknesses, they used different language. So they, for each of the areas, they would say, here's our strengths in this area. And then they would have the next area, which would normally be, weaknesses, but they called it something else. I don't know if anybody caught that.
Was it the moving forward?
Yeah, they used the terminology moving forward. Um, which I mean, that's just, in a way, that's just wordsmithing, but it also kind of acknowledges that they know that this is a plan that's going to take time, that they know that they're not doing everything perfectly. They're not going to say that it's a weakness because that sort of dwells on where they are now. They're saying, here's what we are going to be looking to add into this as we move forward. So I thought that was kind of a nice little turn of phrase there. um, what about in terms of like specific hardware or software? Did they get into that level of detail? Was it more general? Anybody catch anything on those lines? Maybe not. I mean, my impression of it, at least, is that um, I don't think it was too detailed. They weren't getting into super specifics of this piece of hardware, this piece of software. I mean, they did talk about some general technology software platforms. Um, but again, I think that kind of fits for this technology plan. That kind of fits the overall vibe of it, which is that this is meant to be more of kind of the overall vision statement of things. And hopefully, ideally, each of the elements that they talk about then has a more specific plan that's been developed for it, where they do go in and try to analyze. I mean, they do talk about supporting infrastructure and updating infrastructure. They do talk about needing to maintain things down the road. Um, but they're certainly not getting down to the level of like social studies curriculum is going to incorporate, the following thing into their planning and so on. Um, so, that's not, I'm not going to say that that's a strength or a weakness of this particular plan. I think it just kind of goes with what this plan seems to be trying to accomplish, which is just kind of set out those big vision things. So yeah, I mean, this is one example, and the forum for this week, our final forum activity, is to have each of you try to locate, if you're in a school district, for your school district or school setting, or if you don't work in a school, if you work at a place of business, maybe to see if they have one. But to try to learn a little bit about what technology integration plan you're currently working under, um, and to give it a bit of a look and to see what you think about that particular plan. Um, I'm kind of continuously surprised by the number of school districts that just don't have one. Um, which just makes me wonder. I'd love to kind of go into a specific school in those districts and kind of look under the hood and try to figure out how technology is being used. But most school districts do in one form or another. So the forum for this week is basically to just ask each of you to see what you can find out about your own school's technology plan. Take a look at it if you can, and just do a little reflection on it, kind of like what we did here for the Newington plan, and just sort of analyze it for the good and the bad and so on. If you find that your school district doesn't have any kind of a unified technology plan, then for your post, maybe reflect a little bit on whether you think that lack of a plan has had any impact on technology in your schools. So you can certainly talk about personal experiences you may have had or things like that. So that's going to be the forum activity. Um,
Well, I want to say this
yeah,
that where I work at, technology is it's a no-no word,
mm,
and they don't want to know anything about technology because they're scared of technology.
got it.
Um, really, I'm like the IT guy where I work at. I'm the one who fixes the computers, the changes the hard drives, softwares. I'm working on one right now. So we don't have a technology based uh, curriculum
Yeah, or plan.
or
So
plan. It's
yeah,
just, and that's why I'm taking this course to maybe I can introduce some technology into the system.
yeah. Well, so for the forum, I'll show the forum in just a minute here, but basically I've set the forum up where you're either going to be following plan A or plan B. Plan A would be if you find that your school district has a technology plan, you're going to reflect on that. Plan B then is for people who find that their situations don't have a plan. And like I said, in that case, you'll be reflecting on maybe what kind of an impact you think that lack of a plan has had in that particular school setting. So sounds like you will have a perfect example for Plan B.
Yeah,
So yeah. So anyway, to kind of bring this then around full circle back to our instructional design plans. is it's not going to be required for you to include a technology integration piece into your instructional design plans. It's an optional thing. If your instructional design plan is making heavy use of a specific technology or plans to make use of a specific technology, then you might want to include just one little section in your final document that just provides a brief overview. I'm not going to be looking for a fully implemented technology plan with all of the phases and everything, but maybe just address it and say, in order to execute this instructional design, we will need to have the following technology in place. And along with that, we'll need to have a plan for this training, for this maintenance, for this integration, this hardware, this software. So just sort of being aware that that might be something that makes sense to include in your instructional design. But if it doesn't, it doesn't, and that's fine. I'm not going to be requiring that the instructional design plans contain a technology integration section in them. But if it applies and if it would be useful, you think as a final little piece of your plan, then certainly feel free to include a brief overview of what direction that technology integration plan might take. All right, so that speaking of the final instructional design plans, let me start to wrap up this evening by well, first of all, let me just quickly talk about that forum, which I just explained. So I've mostly already said this, but I've included the forum directions on a separate page again so that you can see the directions and kind of write your write up first and then paste it into the forum itself. But like I said, there's sort of two paths described here. First one would be if you can find an existing plan for your school or your workplace, and then in that case, you're going to kind of do a brief analysis of it, just 1 to 2 paragraphs, nothing more than that. If like Jesse, you're in a situation where there is not an existing plan, then in that case, your post is going to be a little more speculative, but maybe talk about what sort of impact you think that has had on your school setting or in your classrooms or in your workplace, and so on. And again, 1 to 2 paragraphs. This doesn't have to be a super in-depth analysis, but just to kind of, whether you have a plan or not, to get a chance to kind of explore that a little bit and to think a little bit about the impact that that plan has or the lack of the plan has in either case. So that's the forum assignment, and as always, the actual forum is here, and you'll just create a new thread and post there. So the last thing is our final instructional design project documents. Um, and all the details are here. I'm not going to read every single thing, but as I said, the majority of your writing work should already be done at this point. So hopefully nobody's feeling stressed out, like, oh my gosh, 2 weeks to go in the class and I've suddenly got to create a whatever 8-page, 10-page paper. Most of the writing is already done. This is going to be largely about just assembling those pieces into a coherent whole. So I look at it from sort of two different perspectives of the content and then the structure. So the content is all the things that we've done in our different phases. So the needs analysis, the instructional goals, the audience analysis, the sequencing and segmentation of the instruction. That was all the work with the types of learning and the IPA breakdown of the task of the goals. Information about the instructional materials, the assessment piece, what types of assessments are going to be incorporated into this. If you have a technology component, a brief overview of a technology integration plan or guidelines. So, as you can see, all of this is all the stuff that you've already created in terms of content. The structure of it then, I'm kind of leaving up to you, depending on what you think makes the most sense and how you would like to organize that content. Um, I kind of suggest two possible approaches. These are not the only approaches, but one would be by content area. So this would be like taking each of your four phases and just kind of putting them together into one document, basically addressing the phase one stuff first, then the phase two stuff, then the phase three stuff, then the phase four, and just kind of separating it all out that way. Or another way to go about it would be to use the flow of instruction and use that as the guiding force. So in that case, it would be like doing this with your phases, where you would use your IPA steps as kind of the big framework. And then as you talk about each step, you would talk about the assessment piece, you would talk about the materials piece, you'd talk about the technology piece, and you'd kind of incorporate all of the information about that step of the learning plan, and then the next step and the next step. So in that case, it's like you're taking your four phase documents and almost shuffling them like a deck of cards so that they're interlocked with each other. Um, there's not a right or wrong way. Both approaches will work. It really just comes down to what you're more comfortable with and what makes more sense for you in terms of how to organize the content. Um, and like I said, you may have a different approach. You may do a hybrid of this and put some information separate and then have other information where it's kind of all blended together. Um, so that's basically going to be the task. So you're now becoming an editor for this document. You might be making some changes if you've gotten feedback on things or things that you've with your alpha testing. Maybe you got some feedback on some things you want to change. Absolutely, feel free to change anything you want to. Um, but in the end, you want to just sort of end up with a coherent document that somebody could read and really get a clear sense of this entire instructional design plan, from what was the problem all the way down to what's the final assessment for student learning, and then sort of everything in between. um, as I say here, there's always questions. How many pages should this be? How long should it be? Um, from my perspective, I've always been one that is more interested in the quality of what's there and the completeness of it, as opposed to setting some arbitrary length. Um, so the best guideline I can give is, if you were to take all four of your phase documents and put them together, maybe that adds up to, let's say, 20 pages. Your final document will probably end up being something shorter than that. I don't think anybody's document should get longer, because if anything, you're going to be removing places where there's redundant information or the same information is included more than once. So, if all of your phases together are 20 pages, then I don't know, maybe your final document is 16 or 17 or something like that. But again, I'm more interested in, is all of this information included? Is it organized in a way that makes sense? And, does it provide a really clear picture of this instructional design? In terms of submitting it, it's just like the phase documents. You're going to create it, you're going to convert it to a PDF, you're going to upload it to the assignment upload page, name it last name, first initial, final ID project. Do use section headers for each of your major topic areas. So that could be subject headers by content area, or if you're doing it by your IPA plan, the subject headers might be each step of the ID plan has a header. However you end up organizing it, but do put in sub section headers. And yeah, so that's kind of the basics. Due date, I mean, next week is our final class. I'm then setting the official due date for the 13th, which is another week past that. So that's 2 weeks from tonight. But then technically, you really have until December 20th if you need it. because by that date, I kind of need to have everything in my hands so that I know I have time to go through it all and get my grades turned in a couple days later. Um, Certainly turn things in as soon as you have them. There's no reason to wait until the end. If I get things earlier, then that just means I get a chance to kind of get ahead of the grading. But just so you kind of know where the final finish line is. So we have our class next week, then you have an additional week till the official due date, and then you even have an additional week past that as sort of buffer time. So you really have 3 weeks still to wrap this up and get it submitted to me. All right. Any questions on that? The final project. All right. Well, if not, that is really what I needed to go over for tonight. So again, there's the coursework summary. Take a moment to just go back and make sure you've got everything turned in that you need to turn in. The forum for this week, our final forum, based on what you find out about your technology plans or lack of technology plans. And then just starting to work on this final document and starting to get that together. Like I said, I will turn around phase 4 as soon as I see them so that you get that feedback. And any other work that you still have outstanding, just try to get that in as soon as possible. And I'm just going to try to keep crunching through all of that. And then again, next week, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here because the 6 of you have been very consistent attendees on these Tuesday nights. But next week, I am going to be asking that everybody attend the class. You'll do a very, very brief, just overview of what your ID project was and how it went. We'll take care of the course evaluations. We'll do just a couple of other wrap-up activities, and then that will really be it for the formal work for this course. All right. So if there are not any other questions, that is it for this evening. Thank you all for being here and attending and for your contributions. Have a good week heading into December. We'll keep our fingers crossed that the wind tomorrow doesn't affect us too badly. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good
Thank you
night.
very much.